The ambient murmur of chatter enveloped Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, seamlessly interwoven with the distant announcements echoing through the terminal. Angela Robinson moved with practiced elegance, her tailored navy suit, a striking complement to her dark skin, her silver hair neatly styled in an elegant bun. In one hand she held a first-class boarding pass for Flight 307 to New York, while her other clutched a small leather handbag, unpretentious yet refined, just like her. As she neared the gate, Angela surveyed the bustling scene. Passengers hurried by, some precariously balancing coffee cups and others engrossed in last-minute phone conversations. Gate agents tapped away on their keyboards, seemingly oblivious to the throng passing in front of them. Among the crowd, one person caught her attention, Lauren Mitchell, a blonde flight attendant in her early 30s, whose demeanor radiated a barely concealed impatience. Lauren's piercing blue eyes scanned each boarding pass as passengers approached. When Angela arrived at the front of the line, she offered her ticket with a courteous smile. Lauren barely acknowledged it, eyebrows nodding in skepticism. "This is first class," she stated flatly, not accepting the pass from Angela's hand. "Yes," Angela replied smoothly, undeterred. "I'm aware." Lauren paused, her lips tightening. "I need to see some ID." While Angela's expression remained steady, she felt a slight tension in her features. "I wasn't aware that was required for boarding." "It's not usually," Lauren conceded, lowering her voice to a near whisper. "But, we have all sorts trying to sneak into first class." Angela's grip on her boarding pass tightened. She understood all too well. Wordlessly, she retrieved her ID and handed it over. Lauren barely scrutinized it, as if the verification of Angela's identity was secondary. With a forced smile, Lauren returned the ID, suddenly announcing, "There's been an issue with your ticket." The professional veneer in her voice had a touch of urgency now. Angela raised her eyebrows. "An issue?" Lauren sighed, shaking her head as if this were a minor inconvenience. "I'm afraid your seat might have been booked incorrectly." "I booked it myself," Angela replied, her calm demeanor unwavering. Lauren didn't waver. "Right. Well, mistakes happen." Angela took a moment, studying the younger woman carefully. Lauren, now avoiding eye contact, shifted her weight uncomfortably. Behind them, the line of passengers began to fidget. A cough broke the silence. A well-dressed man checked his watch impatiently. A mother shifted her toddler on her hip, murmuring something under her breath. "I'd like to speak to a manager," Angela finally said. Lauren let out a half-hearted laugh, disbelief creeping in. "Ma'am, I can handle this. No need for a manager." Angela remained unmoved. "A manager?" she echoed, her tone steady. Lauren paused. There was an unyielding strength in the older woman's voice, a quiet intensity that made the air thick with tension. Yet Lauren had always thrived in her role. The uniform she wore commanded respect, and passengers were expected to adhere to her authority. No exceptions. With a deep breath, she decided to press on. "I'm going to need you to step aside. We need to keep the line moving." Angela didn't budge. There was no protest, just an unwavering gaze fixated on Lauren. Something about that unflinching stare unsettled Lauren. In an impulsive moment, she did something she'd never done in her years on the job. She took Angela's boarding pass and tore it in half without a second thought. A collective gasp swept through the queue. Some passengers looked on in shock, while others deliberately averted their eyes, pretending to be engrossed in their phones. Angela remained still, the shredded remnants of her first-class ticket drifting to the ground. With a swift wave towards the terminal entrance, Lauren said, "You can head back to customer service and they'll—" But Angela had already begun to walk away, not in disgrace, not in rage, but with a chilling sense of detachment. Lauren anticipated a scene, maybe an explosion of anger or a call for security. Instead, Angela simply flashed a small, knowing smile as she left, leaving a tightening knot in Lauren's stomach. Behind her, the gate agent, Tom Reynolds, had been watching in stunned silence. At nearly 50, he wore a slightly rumpled uniform, the residue of a long day. His fingers fidgeted on the keyboard nervously. Was that really necessary? Tom asked in a low voice as Lauren returned to her post, rolling her eyes in response. Come on, Tom. You saw her. Her intentions were clear. Tom offered no rebuttal. Instead, he continued to track the direction Angela had gone. 5 minutes. Later, there she was, in the Airglobe VIP lounge, the world of the elite. A serene, polished environment crafted for the privileged. Plush leather seats, ambient lighting, attendants discreetly refilling crystal-clear glasses. Lauren walked in with an air of confidence, but the moment her gaze landed on Angela, comfortably settled in one of the lounge's armchairs, her stomach plummeted. Tom stood beside her, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. When Angela looked up, it was the first moment Lauren truly grasped who she was. Not merely a first-class passenger or a wealthy woman seeking an upgrade, Angela Robinson, the founder and owner of the airline. Lauren felt the blood drain from her face. Angela took a deliberate sip of water before placing the glass down gently. Her voice was calm and measured, yet undeniably firm. Please sit. Lauren hesitated, then slowly sank into the chair across from Angela, feeling a sense of powerlessness she hadn't experienced in years. Angela folded her hands neatly in her lap. Tell me, she said, her voice as smooth as silk. Do you often decide who belongs in first class? Lauren opened, her mouth searching for an excuse, a justification, anything, but Angela raised a hand, silencing her effortlessly. You represent my company, Angela continued, and what you did today wasn't just unacceptable, it was dangerous. Lauren swallowed hard. I was just following procedure. Angela cocked her head. No, you were following prejudice. Silence fell between them as Angela allowed her words to sink in before leaning back. And unfortunately for you, I don't tolerate either. Lauren gripped her skirt beneath the table, her face flushing. Angela glanced at Tom. We'll discuss the consequences shortly. In that moment, Lauren understood. Her fate was no longer in her hands. Her throat felt dry. She sat across from Angela Robinson, the woman she had just humiliated, only to discover that Angela was the CEO of Airglobe Airlines. The weight of realization pressed down on her, making the elegant VIP lounge feel stifling. Tom Reynolds, the gate manager, stood rigidly beside her, hands still clasped behind his back like a guilty child. He must have known, or at least suspected, who Angela was when she entered the lounge. Unlike Lauren, he hadn't torn up her ticket. Like some power-crazed enforcer, he had stood by in silence, and now he would bear the consequences too. Angela, however, remained unfazed, the epitome of control. She took another slow sip of water, the glass making hardly a sound as it returned to the polished table. Then she spoke. Miss Mitchell, her voice measured and smooth. Let's talk about instincts. Lauren forced herself to nod, despite the shame prickling through her skin. Yes, ma'am. Angela leaned forward slightly, her dark eyes locking onto Lauren's. What exactly did your instincts tell you when I handed you my ticket? Lauren's fingers tightened in her lap. I was just trying to... Angela raised a hand, a silent command to halt. Lauren pressed her lips together tightly. Let me tell you what they said, Angela continued, her voice steady, yet undeniably assertive. They said I didn't belong here, that my presence in first class raised questions, that I must have been trying to take advantage of the system. Heat rushed to Lauren's cheeks. I didn't mean... But you did, Angela cut in smoothly. If I had looked different, maybe older, dressed in a conservative business suit, or if I were white, you wouldn't have thought twice about it, would you? Lauren felt her breath hitch. Across the table, Angela leaned in slightly, noting Lauren's unease. You thought you were justified, didn't you? Angela pondered as she tore up the ticket, instructing Lauren to step aside. The silence hung heavily before she added, Do you find satisfaction in belittling passengers, Miss Mitchell? In a sudden movement, Lauren met Angela's gaze, her pride igniting. Of course not. Angela studied her for a long moment, exhaling softly. Her attention shifted to Tom. "And you?" she asked. "You saw it happen. You hesitated, but you didn't step in. Why?" Tom's face turned pale, tension tightening his jaw as he cleared his throat. "I made the wrong choice." Angela flashed a faint, cold smile. "Indeed you did." Lauren felt the weight of the silence wrap around her like a thick fog. After a brief pause, Angela adjusted her position. "I had a purpose for flying today," she stated, "and it wasn't just to evaluate my airline from the ground. Airglobe is currently under scrutiny by investors." A jolt of dread shot through Lauren. Tom visibly stiffened. "Oh, dear." Angela's hand rose once more, a silent cue for quiet. She looked at both of them. "Several major investors are considering increasing their stakes in our company," she explained. "This assessment goes beyond numbers. They're looking at our company culture, customer experience, and the values we uphold." Lauren felt, her vision dim as the weight of this revelation sank in. "Wait." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "I didn't know." "No," Angela confirmed. "You didn't. And there lies the problem." The atmosphere thickened with tension. Angela allowed her words to settle before continuing, speaking carefully. "I was evaluating my own organization," she admitted. "I do this from time to time. I want to see how we treat our passengers, especially those who don't fit a narrow expectation of what first class should represent." Lauren dug her nails into her palms. Angela leaned in slightly. "And you failed. Completely." Silence hung in the air. Tom looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Lauren's chest tightened. I understand," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I'll do better. I'll apologize." Angela let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Do you think this is just about an apology, Miss Mitchell? Do you realize how much damage you could have caused today?" Lauren swallowed hard. "This company is worth billions," Angela continued, her tone calm yet piercing. "Investors are always on the lookout for signs of internal dysfunction. A business that tolerates discrimination, even at the customer service level, risks significant financial loss. If that video from the gate goes viral, which is quite likely, Airglobe could lose millions in a matter of hours." Lauren felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. Angela glanced towards the doorway. "I imagine the PR team is already drafting a statement," she mused. "But no carefully crafted press release can undo what happened today." Lauren's breath caught in her throat. Angela turned back to her. "Now tell me, Miss Mitchell, what do you think should happen next?" Lauren's mind raced. Was she about to be fired? Would she be blacklisted from the industry? She felt an overwhelming urge to plead, to say anything that might make this right, but the words wouldn't come. Angela let the silence linger. Then she leaned back. "Here's what will happen," she stated firmly. "Effective immediately, you're suspended. You'll need to complete mandatory diversity and customer service retraining. If you don't succeed, you won't be returning to your position. And if you do come back and there's even one more incident, no matter how minor, you'll be permanently dismissed." Lauren felt her face flush with embarrassment. Angela turned her attention to Tom. "And you," she said. Tom stiffened. At her tone, "You will oversee her retraining personally. You must ensure your team understands that this cannot happen again. If I find that you've ignored complaints or allowed bias to persist, you won't just be managing a gate. You'll be looking for a new job." Tom gulped, responding, "Understood, ma'am." Angela nodded slowly. "Good. Now, if you'll excuse me." Without a second look, she stood up. An assistant stepped forward to collect her bag, while the staff at the VIP lounge opened the door for her as she exited. Untouched, unbothered, and completely unfazed. Lauren sat frozen, engulfed in humiliation, powerlessness, and regret. The investors would hear about this. The world might hear about this, and she felt utterly helpless to stop it. In the dimly lit conference room, Lauren stared blankly at the Airglobe training manual in front of her. The corporate logo on the cover blurred as her thoughts raced. Her suspension had been immediate. Within an hour of Angela leaving, she got an email from HR about a mandatory retraining program she had to complete. It was mortifying, but that was just the beginning of her humiliation. A video had started making the rounds. Someone in the boarding line had captured the entire incident. Lauren questioning Angela's ticket, crumpling it up and dismissing her like she was a nobody. Now, the video was spreading online, gaining attention faster than she could process. A headline on a well-known aviation blog read, "First-class discrimination. Airglobe CEO mistaken for fraudulent passenger." Lauren gripped her phone tighter as she read through the comments. Unbelievable. She didn't even check the ticket before tearing it up. That flight attendant deserves to be fired. Right now. How can you be so certain in your prejudice and still be this wrong? Angela Robinson built that airline from scratch, and this is how her employees treat people? Totally embarrassing. Her breath caught in her throat. The video was everywhere now. By the time major news outlets caught wind of the story, it was out. Of control. CNN, The New York Times, Business Insider. The investors Angela mentioned? They had seen it too. Lauren buried her face in her hands. Meanwhile, at the Airglobe corporate offices, Angela sat at the head of the long mahogany table, observing her executive team as they scrambled to manage the fallout. A presentation flickered on the screen in front of her, detailing the PR disaster that was unraveling online. Daniel Clark, her chief communications officer, stood nervously next to the projector. "The situation has escalated quickly," Daniel said, clicking to the next slide. Screenshots of furious tweets, headlines, and customer complaints flashed on screen. Angela stayed silent, unmoved. "Our biggest concern," Daniel continued, stealing glances at Angela, "is the investor evaluation. The board members are anxious." At last Angela spoke. "Have we heard from them directly?" Daniel hesitated before nodding. "Yes. They want a meeting. Immediately." Angela didn't flinch. "Schedule it? Ma'am, they might—" "I said," she interrupted smoothly. "Schedule it." The room fell silent. Angela leaned back in her chair, tapping her fingers against the table. She had built this airline from scratch, and if the investors thought she would let one employee's blunder dictate the fate of Airglobe, they were seriously mistaken. This, however, went beyond mere business. Lauren had made an error. But how many of her colleagues shared that same mindset? Angela clasped her hands together. "I want a comprehensive internal report on customer complaints related to discrimination, profiling, or mistreatment from the past 5 years before the investors arrive." Daniel hesitated. 5 years. Angela was relentless. "Yes." The executives exchanged troubled looks. Angela rose. "Addressing the PR crisis isn't sufficient. We need to overhaul the culture. Otherwise, this airline won't attract any investments." With that, she turned and exited, leaving her team in disarray. Lauren now faced the fallout. By the time she got back to her apartment that evening, her name was trending. She flicked on the TV. A blunder. Airglobe Airlines under fire after CEO Angela Robinson was misidentified as an imposter and publicly shamed by a flight attendant. The company has announced immediate changes to its training protocols. Lauren shut off the TV. Her phone buzzed incessantly, but she paid it no mind. The messages were all too familiar. "What were you thinking? You're a disgrace to the airline industry. I hope you never work again." Her stomach twisted in knots. Would her career survive this? She had always taken pride in her work, in the uniform, in the authority it conferred. Now that uniform felt like a burden. Curling up on the couch, she stared blankly at the dark screen. That morning, she had felt in control. Now, she felt utterly helpless. Angela faced the investors. The following morning, Angela entered the high-rise conference room where 6 of Airglobe's largest investors were already seated. A man in his 60s, James Whitmore, rose to greet her. "Angela." "James," she replied smoothly, shaking his hand. The tension in the room was thick. Taking her seat, Angela continued, "I presume you've reviewed the reports." James sighed. "We have, and we're worried. It's precisely incidents like these that justify my approach to running this company," Angela interjected. "The real issue isn't what happened, it's what follows." The investors exchanged glances. Angela pressed on. "If we want Airglobe to prosper for generations, we must make some serious changes. That means we need to rethink our training, hiring practices, and how we hold leadership accountable." One of the investors, a perceptive woman named Eleanor Grant, leaned in. "Angela, you know that public trust is delicate. If we don't manage this right, we could lose millions." Angela held Eleanor's gaze. "And if we turn a blind eye, we risk everything." Silence hung in the air. Finally, James nodded. "We believe in your leadership, Angela. Fix this." Angela stood up. "I already have." With that, she left, always on her own terms. This was Lauren's final opportunity. The next morning, an email from HR landed in her inbox. Final notice: mandatory diversity and leadership training. Failure to complete the training would lead to immediate termination. Lauren stared at her screen, heart racing. The proud part of her wanted to quit, to assert that she didn't need this. But the reality was, she did. She had once been so confident, so sure of who deserved a place in the upper echelons. But now she was faced with the understanding that she had never truly grasped what that meant. She clicked accept. Her future at Airglobe was suddenly out of her hands. Yet, for the first time, she was ready to listen. Lauren sat rigidly in the corporate training room, fingers tightening around a company-issued notebook. The walls were bare except for a large Airglobe mission statement boldly displayed. Excellence in service. Integrity in action. The irony stung. The space was small and lacked windows, clearly meant for one-on-one re-education sessions. She wasn't here to enhance her customer service skills. She was here because she had become a liability. Opposite her was Karen Phillips, a senior HR director. In her early 50s, Karen wore a look that suggested she had encountered this type of scenario before. "This is a behavioral retraining program," Karen began, adjusting her reading glasses. "It's not a punishment. However, you need to understand that failing to complete this process will lead to immediate termination." Lauren nodded. She had received this message before. Many times. Karen leaned in closer. "Let's start with something straightforward. Why do you think you're here?" Lauren tensed. She knew the corporate response, but she hesitated, still holding tightly to her own perspective on the matter. Karen let out a sigh as she leafed through a stack of papers. "Let's review what transpired with the viral video incident," she said, pulling up Lauren's transcript. "Lauren Mitchell, I'll need to see some identification," she read. "Angela Robinson, I wasn't aware that was required for boarding," Lauren had responded. "Lauren Mitchell, it's not usually, but, well, you understand," came the answer, and Lauren flinched. As Karen recounted the exchange, it sounded even worse now. "Now, can you clarify what you meant by your last statement?" Karen asked, looking directly at Lauren. She swallowed hard. "I was just doing my job," Lauren replied, a hint of defensiveness creeping in. "Your job was to ensure smooth boarding for all passengers," Karen retorted. "Instead, you singled someone out, assumed she didn't belong, and humiliated her in front of others." Lauren's jaw tensed. "I didn't know who she was," she muttered. Karen raised an eyebrow. "Does that really matter?" The tension in the room thickened, and Lauren looked away, unable to respond. "Let's proceed," Karen said, tapping the papers in front of her. Meanwhile, at Airglobe headquarters, Angela stood confidently before her board of executives. The investor meeting had unfolded as she anticipated, and now it was time for decisive action. The response to this incident? She began pacing. Deliberately, will shape Airglobe's reputation for the next decade. Daniel, the chief communications officer, nodded in agreement. "We've put out a statement. The public's reaction is mixed," he added. Some appreciate our actions, while others view it as just a PR move. Angela halted her pacing. That's typical because most companies focus solely on damage control, she stated firmly. We must be better than that. She turned to Alicia Vaughn, head of corporate training. How soon can we implement a company-wide retraining initiative? Alicia, with her sharp and no-nonsense demeanor, replied without hesitation, If we move quickly, we can do it in 30 days. Every employee, from flight crews to executives, will participate. Angela nodded approvingly. Good work. James Whitmore, a senior investor, leaned in. These measures are impressive, Angela, but we need to consider Lauren Mitchell's future. What happens to her? The room fell silent, and Angela's face gave nothing away. She's undergoing retraining. If she doesn't succeed, she's out, she declared. James sighed, processing the weight of her words. And if she does pass? He asked. Angela's lips hinted at a faint smile. That depends on whether she truly absorbs the lessons. Back in training, Lauren endured hours of policy videos, case studies addressing bias in customer service, and personal discussions about the impact of subconscious prejudice on decision-making. Initially, she had rolled her eyes, delivering stiff, rehearsed answers. However, a shift occurred during a session featuring a real passenger complaint recording. A black businessman recounted an incident where a flight attendant refused to serve him another drink, assuming he'd had his fill. In stark contrast, his white colleagues were promptly offered refills. Then came another story, and yet another, and another. A sense of discomfort began to brew within Lauren. It wasn't just anger at the situation. It was something deeper. A painful self-awareness. How often had she made quick judgments about passengers without even realizing it? She recalled Angela's calm demeanor when the ticket was torn, how she hadn't raised an objection or shouted out, because she had been through this many times before, countless times. Lauren let out a shaky breath, massaging her temples. She had never seen herself as part of the issue, but perhaps she was. Reflecting on Angela's last move. 2 weeks later, Angela found herself at her desk reviewing a report on Lauren's development. Karen had been sending thorough updates. Lauren initially resisted, but eventually, something shifted. Angela's phone chimed. Karen's voice came through. She finished the program. Angela leaned back in her chair. Did she pass? A brief silence. Yes. Angela smirked to herself. Good, she replied. Bring her to me. It was time for Lauren's final evaluation. As Lauren entered Angela Robinson's office, her heart raced. Angela sat at her desk, composed and unreadable. Without waiting for an invitation, Lauren spoke first. I was wrong, she stated, her voice steady, yet tinged with emotion. Angela's eyebrows raised slightly. Go on. Lauren inhaled deeply. I thought I was simply following the rules. But that wasn't it. I was making assumptions about who belongs and who doesn't, all without realizing it. Angela scrutinized her for a moment before gesturing to the chair. Sit. Lauren complied, and Angela clasped her hands. I could have terminated your position. Lauren nodded, fully aware. Angela tilted her head slightly. Why should I keep you? Lauren paused, but only for a heartbeat. Because I understand now, she replied. And if you give me a chance, I'll ensure that no one on my team makes the same mistake I did. Angela leaned back thoughtfully, weighing her words. Then finally, she nodded. Welcome back, Miss Mitchell. Lauren let out a sharp breath, feeling the heaviness lift. It wasn't just about reclaiming her job. It was about seizing a second chance to make things right. Dressed in her crisp Air Globe uniform, Lauren stared at her reflection in the airport's employee lounge mirror. Today marked her first day back. The same navy blazer and silver wings were pinned to her chest, but she felt different. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and stepped out into the bustling terminal. A new kind of first-class welcome awaited her. Gate 307. The very gate where it had all begun. Lauren positioned herself at the boarding area, observing. As first-class passengers approached, she greeted each one with genuine care, moving beyond mere protocol to truly connect. A young black woman in an expensive business suit came forward, presenting her ticket. Without hesitation, Lauren scanned it, smiled warmly, and said, "Welcome aboard, Miss Carter. Enjoy your flight." The woman returned her smile and nodded as she passed through. Lauren breathed deeply. She understood that redemption wouldn't come from a single interaction, but this was a significant step. Angela's decisive moment unfolded as she sat in her corner office, overlooking the city skyline. The aftermath of the incident had been contained. Investors remained committed, and AirGlobe's new diversity and accountability training was now implemented throughout the company. Angela had made her choice about Lauren. She chose not to fire her. Angela recognized that true leadership meant digging deeper than just eliminating issues. It involved fostering genuine change. Lauren had confronted her challenges, and if she could carry that lesson forward and share it with others, she would prove more valuable than any replaceable flight attendant. A soft knock at her office door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Lauren entered, standing tall yet looking uncertain. Angela gestured for her to take a seat. Lauren paused, then spoke. "I just wanted to thank you for believing in me." Angela regarded her with a steady gaze and nodded slightly. "You earned this second chance," she replied simply. Their eyes locked. "I won't waste it," Lauren assured her. Angela leaned back in her chair, fingers woven together. "Good, but there's something else you need to grasp." Lauren sat up straighter. "What is it?" Angela let the silence hang before responding. "The lesson you learned," she said. "Pass it on." Lauren absorbed those words. Then, after a moment of thought, she nodded. "I will." Angela observed her closely for just a bit longer. With a sense of satisfaction, she returned to her desk. Lauren took that as her signal to leave. As she stepped out of the office, a feeling welled up inside her. Something she hadn't felt in weeks. A sense of purpose. She realized she wasn't just punching a clock. She was here to set things right. It was the final boarding call. Angela stood in Terminal A, taking in the rhythmic bustle of passengers, attendants, and pilots. Airports had a unique vibe, where strangers met and parted, often after brief encounters that could alter the course of their lives. She had built this airline from the ground up, fought to carve out her spot in this industry. Now, she had defined the standard for what would come next. As she approached her gate, an announcement crackled over the intercom. Final boarding call for Flight 307 to New York. Angela's lips curved into a faint smile. The world was relentless in its forward motion, and she was determined to keep pace. She made her way to the gate, free of any distractions. When she handed over her ticket, the gate agent greeted her with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Miss Robinson." Angela nodded in response. This was where she truly belonged.